First impressions count. And for most circumstances, the first element of the first impression is one we gather through our eyes. It's all about the way you look. So in this video, I want to talk about how to create a good first impression through the way that you look. When we meet someone for the first time, we form an impression of them within the first 2 or 3 seconds of seeing them. It's all about the way that we look. And therefore, it's vital that we get this right. And Parker Pens used that idea in an advertising campaign a number of years ago. It's known as the "You Are What You Eat" campaign, and I first saw this as a billboard hoarding with a huge picture of a chewed biro. The campaign was created by the advertising agency BBH in London, and as you'd expect, the campaign is copyright and I can't show it to you. But from my recollection, that first advert looked something like this. It was a chewed biro. And for a number of days, I wondered what precisely this chewed biro was advertising. Until a few days later, they replaced that advert with a picture of one of their pens. Not a hugely expensive pen, the sort of pen you'd expect to pay £10, $10, €10 for at a travel stationery shop. But the point they were making is obvious. If you sit down at a meeting and you pull out a chewed biro, people will judge you, rightly or wrongly. If you pull out a neat, smart biro, they will make a different judgment. And I'm not going to tell you which one's right or wrong. I'm going to say it's your choice as to which judgment you direct people to by the choice of how you look and the accessories you use. Let's start with clothing. And the cardinal rule is simple. Dress in a way that is appropriate to the situation. Think about where you're going to meet, who you're going to meet, the organisation you represent and the organisation they represent, the culture within which you're working, the place you're meeting, the time of day. All of those things will dictate a certain range of appropriate clothing and indeed appropriate behaviour. The second thing to think about is that people like people who are like themselves. If you deliberately step out of the norm of style and clothing that the people you're meeting with have adopted, then you'd better be prepared for the possible consequences. But there's another rule which I like to quote, which is that people like people who are like they want to be. So an alternative to dressing in the same way as the people you're meeting is dressing in a way that is a half a notch above their level, or indeed half a notch above your own level. If you go too far above your own level, or too far above the level that is appropriate with the situation, then it will seem inappropriate, it will seem wrong, and it will feel uncomfortable. But by dressing that half a notch above, you're kind of saying, yes, I've got a bit of pride in who I am. I know that I'm ready for that next step. There are 2 further tips that I'd give. And the first is to take good care of your clothes at whatever level of expenditure you can afford, whatever level of smartness that is appropriate for the situation. Nothing will spoil the effect more than shabby clothing. Make sure that they're properly washed, properly looked after, properly ironed, and if they're starting to look shabby and none of that can fix them, it's time to replace them. And the other tip I'd give you is don't forget the shoes. Some people really notice shoes. It's oh so easy to forget to care for your shoes because they're at ground level and we don't look at them, but some people do. And if someone notices your shoes and they are properly cared for, best case, they will notice that because they care about shoes. Worst case is they don't think about it. But you know what? What we don't think about, we don't mind. If on the other hand they notice your shoes and they're looking shabby, that they will register. Oh, and I do have an extra tip about ironing that I learned from a colleague many, many years ago. It's not so much about the creases you take out, it's about the creases you put in. People don't notice what's not there, but they do notice what is there. And if what they notice is some really sharp creases that are supposed to be there, that can dominate their attention. Next, let's talk about accessories and equipment, because that's actually what people most notice. We're back to the pen. The rule is decent quality, well maintained, and never showy. If people pay more attention to your accessories than they do to you, you've got it wrong. Here is where you've got an opportunity to use colour in a creative way. Often you will choose to dress in a fairly muted palette so that your dress is appropriate to a formal situation. But you can use colour in your accessories, whether it's your clothing accessories like belts or jewellery, or it's your stationery accessories like your briefcase, like your notebook or your pen. You can use colour in these to provide accent and energy to your persona. So let's pause and take a look at the impact of colour on the way people perceive you. Now, obviously, this is highly culturally dependent, and I come from a Western, English-speaking, northern culture in the UK. So what I'm going to give you are certainly rules that you can rely on in similar cultures in Northern Europe, in the United States, Australia, Canada. Some of these will carry over into other cultures, others might not. So do your own independent research. And it's also important to note that colour is a highly subjective thing, and the guidance I'm going to give you is good guidance on average, but it may not apply to a specific individual or in a specific culture. But let's take a look at some of the colours you might choose for clothing and accessories and the kind of associations people will often make to those colours. Let's start with grey. Grey is neutral. It is seen as conservative, safe, but possibly as a little dull. It's not an exciting colour. Of course, with the right coloured accessories, ties, scarves, brooches, belts, you can bring grey up. And of course, if you're wearing a suit, then your blouse or your shirt can also provide some accent, some life, some energy. Perhaps at the opposite extreme is red. It's attention grabbing, it's exciting, it's energizing, it's extreme. It signifies passion, risk-taking, and dominance. And in the right amounts, in the right culture, it can also signify power. Blue, on the other hand, signifies calm, intelligence, loyalty, and creativity. Green, of course, nowadays has environmental overtones, but it often signifies charisma and energy. But it's also a calming colour, a colour of healing, which suggests to many people that its wearer might be sympathetic or empathetic. Purple is the colour of luxury and opulence, but it also communicates, certainly in many cultures, the idea of being artistic and creative. Orange is a colour that many people read as friendly, also energetic, creative and successful. Pink. Yes, in many cultures now, pink is seen as feminine. And in men, it therefore represents a man who's confident with sensitivity and a little bit of intuitive thinking. But also, pink these days is seen as a colour of modernity and also a willingness to compromise. Yellow is a happy colour. It represents to many people optimism and cheerfulness. But it also carries undertones of logic and reason. And if you darken yellow, you get to brown, and that has that sense of groundedness, stability, earthiness, if you like. Brown is dependable. Darken it further and you get to black, and that gives us authority. Black is the colour of power and of austerity. Not many people can carry off wearing a lot of black, but where they do, it signifies real confidence. The opposite colour, I suppose, to black, if it's properly a colour, is white. And white is the colour of simplicity, of honesty, of openness. People read white as morally good, as courageous, but also as balanced. And finally, if you add white into any of the colours we talked about and you kind of tone them down to a more pastel, lighter shade, the same colour connotations carry over, but it tones those connotations down to be less intense. You can use these colours in combination, choosing one or two of these for your main clothing and maybe one or two others to accent that clothing, using them in your accessories. In other videos, we'll talk about behaviours and attitudes and gestures and postures and how they contribute to a first impression. However, a simple guide I'd give you is to act naturally. To stand and sit tall, be confident, but to be yourself. However, there is one last tip I want to give. In terms of the way you look, nothing in your clothing or your accessories should draw more attention to itself than it does to contributing to the attention to you. If people are focused on a joke tie or a splendid piece of jewellery, they're not focusing on you. And the first impression they get will not be one of you, but one of you as the owner of that tie, that brooch. Making a first impression is vital, and the choices you make in terms of clothing and accessories and colour are the choices that will dictate to a large part what that first impression is. I'm not here to tell you what are the right choices, but I am here to tell you that if you're not thinking carefully about what are the right choices for you, then you're squandering an opportunity to make the right first impression at your next meeting. Please hit the thumbs up if you like this video. There's lots more Management Courses content to come, so subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss anything. I'll see you next time, and remember, keep learning.